Hello, Algebra 2A. Welcome back to day 2 of lesson 31. We're practicing multiplying and dividing with rational expressions. Today we are going to look at dividing rational expressions. And in our warm-up yesterday, we looked at how we divide fractions. We'll review that when we do problem A. So in problem A, we are going to divide and then evaluate for x is -4 and y is 2. Now, before we start plugging in -4 and 2 in for the x and y, we're going to simplify this as much as possible. First thing we'll do is we'll rewrite our fraction division as multiplication. So in our warm-up yesterday, we talked about how dividing fractions is actually using multiplying by the reciprocal. So we've got our 8x to the fourth over 7xy stays the same. Then we're going to multiply by 7xy to the third. This is now the reciprocal of that second fraction over 2x squared. So there's going to be our multiplication problem set up. Next, we'll look to start simplifying. So I'm starting to look at my numerator and denominator, and my 8 and my 2 are both divisible by 2, so that's going to become 4 and 1. And then my 7 is divisible by 7, and so is that 7. That's divisible by 1. Next thing, we'll start looking at our variables. So I got, in my numerator, I've got x to the fourth right here, and then an x, that would be x to the first. So there's 5 x's up here. Denominator has 3 x's. So if there's 5 up in the numerator, 3 x's in the denominator, all 3 in the denominator will cancel. And then we're left with 5 minus 3 is 2. We're left with x squared up in our numerator, which I'm just going to place right there. So there's what's left in our numerator, x squared. Next, we have a y to the third in our numerator and a y in our denominator. So this one y will cancel out one of the y's in the numerator. We still have a y squared left in our numerator. Now we're ready to multiply. So since we've got everything simplified, you can see now your numbers are much smaller. So instead of doing 8 times 7, we're only doing 4 times 1, which is 4 in our numerator. X squared, y squared. Nothing for that to multiply. Denominator is 1 times 1, so that just ends up as being our answer. Secondly, we'll put in -4 and 2. I'll just run over here to do that. So 4 times -2. That would be -4. 4 times -4 squared times 2 squared. And again, anytime you're putting a number in for a variable, you're going to want to go ahead and put that in parentheses. Then this could just be plugged into a calculator, or we can do some order of operations. So -4 squared is 16, 2 squared is 4. So 16 times 4, that's going to be 64. And then 64 times 4 is 256. So there would be our answer once we start to evaluate for -4 and 2. Now we're ready to head down to part B, dividing rational expressions. So in problem B, I've already changed it to multiplying by the reciprocal. The next thing to do is to look at factoring everything we can. So in my first fraction, I've got a x plus 2 in the numerator and an x minus 5 in the denominator. These are both already factored, so there's no other common factors. In my second fraction, I can see I've got two terms, x squared minus 5x. And I'm going to start to look at, is that a difference of squares? No, because 5 is not a perfect square. And then next I can see that both of those terms have an x in it. So I'm going to factor out a GCF of x, and then I'm left with x minus 5 in parentheses. So I take both terms, divide them by x, and that's what I'm going to place back in my parentheses. Second equation has, or second denominator down here has two terms, x squared minus 7x. Well, I'll factor out an x again, and then I'm left with an x minus 7 left in parentheses. So I've got the GCFs factored out. There's nothing else that I can factor. Next, I'll look, is there anything in common? Well, we have an x up in the numerator here, x in the numerator down here, x minus 5 in the numerator here, x minus 5 in the denominator there. Then I look at, I've got an x plus 2 and an x minus 7. Those do not simplify, so I'll put my answer over here. answer is x plus 2 over x minus 7. And then identify all values of x that would make my denominator equal to 0. Well, if I put a 7 in for x, that would make it 0. So my excluded values here. A 7 would make it 0. I look back to my original problem. If I had a 5, that would make my denominator 0, because 5 minus 5 would be 0. And then if this x right here was a 0, that would also make my denominator 0. So anything times 0 is going to equal 0. So my excluded values, I look back at my denominator. Anywhere in my denominator that would make it the possibility of being 0, I'm going to use as my excluded values. All right, and finally, we'll take a look at example 3. In problem 3, I've gone ahead and factored. So if you want to pause here and take a look at the new forms there, and we'll just discuss the factoring as we go. The first two fractions are being multiplied, and the last fraction is being divided. So I went ahead and took and multiplied by its reciprocal. So now it becomes x minus 2 over 1. Then we start looking at our numerators, denominators, and see if there's anything that we can reduce out. So x squared plus 6x minus 6 would factor into x plus 3, x minus 2. So my a term is 1. And that would mean then I can multiply to negative 6, add to 1. That's going to be 3 and negative 2. Now as I look at my numerator, I've got an x plus 3. Cancels with the x plus 3. Next, I've got an x minus 2. That's going to cancel with the x minus 2. Now something from the warm-up we did, 21 is divisible by 3, it becomes 7. 3 is divisible by 3, it becomes 1. And then I look, I've got an x in the numerator here, cancels out one of my x's in the denominator, that's going to make x squared. So now we got quite a bit going on. Let's collect everything that we have. So up in the numerator, everything got canceled except 7 times 2. So in my numerator, I'm going to have 14. Denominator cancels, that's a 1, x squared y times a 1. So my denominator is just going to be x squared y. So there would be my final answer for number 3. So everything we factor, we look at anything in the numerator denominator that is in common, and we can start to simplify it down. We are going to skip example 4, and we're now ready then to practice lesson 31, day 2. So you can go ahead, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining.